Hey guys, what's up? My name is Zach, and today I'll be doing an election prediction between Deval Patrick, the governor of Massachusetts, versus Donald Trump, the current U.S. president. So Deval Patrick has stood out amongst most of the 2020 contenders, and this is primarily because of Obama's rumored endorsement of Patrick. Well, not endorsement, but his working with Patrick to try to get him to run in 2020. A number of people in Obama's inner circle have also encouraged Patrick, allegedly, to run in 2020. And I don't know how well this will work for Patrick in general or the Democratic Party, and this is mostly because he doesn't really stand out. His name is not very well known like a Bernie Sanders or Joe Biden, and he's also had a number of different financial and self-interest scandals throughout his time as governor of Maryland, and I think that'll definitely come back to haunt him when he's running against a candidate like Donald Trump, who plasters that all over his Twitter feed. So these are the safe states, and as you can see, there are a number of states that will not be safe in Trump's column, like Missouri and South Carolina, and this is because of the African-American factor, because Deval Patrick is an African-American, and these states were also close during Obama's run in 2008 and 2012, so looking back on that and looking back on the fact that there'll probably be some peaked African-American turnout in 2020 if Deval Patrick is the candidate, you can label these states as not being safe in Trump's column. Okay, so let's just go straight to the safe, likely leaning toss-up states. Well, not toss-ups, of course, I don't do toss-ups. And one thing I might want to bring up is that 270 to Win, the website I'm currently using for these election predictions, has put in tilt option, not for presidential elections, but for Senate and House of Representatives. So I don't know whether I'm going to utilize that when I do Senate predictions, but it's just something worth mentioning, I guess. Okay, so the first state I'm going to talk about is Virginia, which I'm going to put as likely, and you'd think that this state would probably be solid in Patrick's column in this case, since it's already likely for other non-African-American candidates, and Deval Patrick is an African-American, so there will be peaked turnout. However, this state does have a lower approval of, higher approval of Donald Trump than the past few months have seen. I believe it stands at 46%, which is still below 50, but it still is seeing a rise in approval here, and it definitely should be lower. His approval definitely should be lower in this state overall, but it isn't. So for that reason, I would label this state as likely, and I think that we're going to see the state become even a little bit more closer for Democrats in some of my other election predictions. And New Mexico and Colorado, I'd label both of them as likely for Patrick, even though Patrick is not Hispanic. I believe that he could drive out turnout here, and I believe he could have good appeal to voters in these states in general. Texas, likely, like I said in my past election predictions, the only way to win the state or to make the state close is to have Hispanic turnout. South Carolina, that's a bit of a stretch already, making it not solidly in Trump's column. I think that if Deval Patrick really drove home the African-American factor, he could make these states competitive, like South Carolina and Missouri, but I doubt that's going to happen, so likely for Trump, I'd say. Same argument for Missouri, which I just said before. Minnesota, likely. There will be African-American turnout in this state, which isn't a huge factor, but it's a factor to consider regardless. This state has a... let me just check the approval, actually. Yeah, negative 15. I'd say this state would be likely for most other Democratic candidates in general, so yeah, likely to Patrick. Georgia, I consider likely to Trump, although their African-American turnout is a bigger factor in this state than South Carolina and Missouri. I don't think that this state can be flipped. I don't think it could even become close in 2020, even if the candidate's an African-American, because unless we see the same level of African-American turnout that we saw with Obama, which is incredibly unlikely, this state will not flip from red, so for that reason I'll make it likely. As for Maine, Deval Patrick is from the Northeast, so I think that'll play a factor. So these two electoral votes I'd say will go likely in this column. And the second district I would say be a lean in Trump's column rather than a likely, which is what I usually put it as. And New Hampshire, for basically the same argument as Maine, I'd make that likely in Deval Patrick's column. I think he could have good appeal to New Hampshire Democrats in particular. Okay, Pennsylvania I consider to be just a lean in Deval Patrick's column. Donald Trump's approval, if we're looking at over here, is 45%, which really should be lower if Democrats want to have a fighting... Well, they already do have a fighting chance in the state, but if they want to have a better chance in the state, it could be lower. So for that reason, I guess African American turnout could be a factor. I could make this state likely, but just because of the closeness in polls and the fact that Trump did win here in 2016, which isn't much of a factor, but I'm still considering it, I'll make this state a lean in Trump's column. As for Michigan, I consider this state to be a lean as well, and I know that African American factor is also has to be considered here as a result of the African American base that's in Michigan, but Deval Patrick doesn't have the name recognition as the same name recognition as Donald Trump. It'll take a big effort to make his name well known, and even with African American factor, I don't think that this state would be anything more than a lean in his column, especially looking at the polls in this state, which is should be much lower for a state that was much lower approval of Donald Trump a few months ago, and it is climbing, so that's something to consider as well, his approval. Ohio, I'd put a lean in Trump's column. As I've said before, this state is becoming closer in the polls, so it's no longer going to be a likely in Trump's column generally. It'll be a lean in Trump's column in most cases, and I consider it to be a lean in this one as well. Arizona, same deal. I consider it to be a lean in Trump's column. His approval is actually at a 50-50 split in this state, so it's pretty hard to say, but I think it's going to become easier for Democrats to win this state overall in my hypothetical election predictions, but Deval Patrick doesn't have good Hispanic appeal. He's not from the region, and with those two factors in consideration, I put it a lean in Trump's column, although it'll be close. Nebraska's second. You could make the African-American argument here, but still, and Trump's low approval, but I don't think Deval Patrick will win here. I don't think he has good Midwestern appeal in general, and I don't think that he could win in this district. Iowa, same argument essentially. Whenever you need to win Iowa by driving out, by running a good grassroots campaign, and I guess African American turnout is a big factor here as well, as we saw with the margins that Obama won in 2008 and 2012. But still, Trump still has a solid base in here, and Deval Patrick probably won't be able to appeal here well. And keep in mind throughout this entire prediction of Deval Patrick's many scandals that he's had as governor, which play a factor in every single state, even though I'm not mentioning them. Nevada, I consider to be a lean in the Patrick column. This is mostly because Donald Trump's approval has gone down in this state. It used to be close, but now it's even lower than it was before. And I believe that Deval Patrick can win this state narrowly. It's one of the more closer states. As we get down to the more closer states, I'm trying to call these states in order from safest to least safest. So keep that in mind as well as you're watching my election prediction videos in general. North Carolina, I consider to be a lean in Trump's column. His approval is up here. I believe it's at a 55% margin, which is higher than it was in the past few months, and it definitely hasn't been going down rapidly, so that's something to consider as well. And Deval Patrick, he is an African American. That's the main reason why I'm making this lean and not likely for Trump. But I don't think his name recognition will go very far in this state, and I don't think that his scandals would do good for him either. Because keep in mind that Donald Trump is a candidate, as we've seen in the 2016 election, to really emphasize scandals of their candidate. Like if the candidate that he's running against has scandals on it, going for them, Donald Trump will attack them nonstop for it, as we saw with Hillary Clinton. And if you ask me, a number of those scandals that Hillary Clinton had, namely the email scandal, was not as big a deal as the American people might have thought it was, but Donald Trump just kept emphasizing it. It just became his rhetoric to the point where people started to buy it, and I believe that he can do the same with Deval Patrick. He's done it before, and I believe he can do it again. Wisconsin, as a result of the African American factor and Trump's low approval in the state in general, as we can see, it is negative 13, which is just 37% approval, which is very low for a state like Wisconsin. You'd think it would be higher, considering that I typically think that Wisconsin is the most Republican state of the Rust Belt, excluding Ohio, of course. But African American factor, Donald Trump's low approval, this state would go Patrick, which makes Deval Patrick the next president of the United States in this hypothetical election scenario. And then now for Florida, which I think will be the hardest one to call, I think that Deval Patrick's scandals will really affect him here. But even with that considered, Oh, and you also have to consider Donald Trump's approval in the state, which is 55%. It is pretty solid in the state. Well, not pretty solid, but it's reasonably high compared for a flip state, I'd say. It's higher than Ohio. So with that in mind, I'd say that this state would go to Donald Trump. And I'm thinking to call this state more in Donald Trump's column in general, just given the polls and given the fact that it is surprisingly high in a state like Florida. You'd think it would be much closer than compared to other flip states. All right, so this is my electoral map. As you can see, Deval Patrick does win, but he wins by a very small margin. He is at risk if he loses any of the states that are close in his column: Wisconsin, Pennsylvania, Michigan, not Nevada, but that wouldn't make it any better for him. If he loses any of these Rust Belt states, he's done for. But there are a number of states that he could also win, like Ohio. You can make the argument for Florida, maybe, but I don't see him winning Florida and losing Wisconsin. Just like I wouldn't see most Democrats doing the same kind of combination. All right, so I hope you guys enjoyed the video. Like I've said in pretty much every single election prediction, feedback is very positive for this channel. Well, not feedback is very positive, but feedback helps this channel in general, so I would appreciate if you would. Comments are always appreciated, suggestions are always appreciated. I enjoy interacting with you guys. So yeah, thanks for watching. See ya.